Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our 13th webinar for the Young Rail Professionals. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jacob Cooper. I'm the National Professional Networking and Development Manager. With us today will be Andrew Haynes, who'll be talking through a little bit of his career, how the railway has evolved, and how he sees the railway evolving further and the challenges we might face. And then further to that, we'll be giving an opportunity for questions and answers. Am I just okay to ask if one of my colleagues can make sure that you can all hear me correctly? Ollie, can I just ask you to type in the chat box?
Sorry, mate, you just saw me there, but I can hear you. Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant. So I'll run through a little bit of housekeeping. All attendees are on automatic mute, which means you won't be able to communicate on the webinar itself, but you can ask questions or raise issues via the chat, via the questions panel in your GoToWebinar. So what we'll do is throughout the conversation, throughout the call, if you want to submit questions for the end, you can submit them via the questions panel, and our colleagues Ollie, Craig and Isabella Lawson, who thankfully are helping out, will be able to collate them, and then we can ask Andrew the questions at the end of the session. What I would say is that there's over 150 people registered for the session, so we may not get through all of the questions. Just prior to going through prior to introducing Andrew, there's just a couple of things that I'd like to make you aware of. We have another, our 14th it will be, webinar tomorrow. So the reason I'm mentioning it is because you've only got one day left to register, but that will see Anna Jane Hunter, who's the Director of the North of England Rail for Network Rail, and Nina Lockwood, who's a founder and director of Intuitive Executive Recruitment. They'll be giving a careers talk on, it's a little bit of a look back for when they were younger and first starting out in the career. And I certainly wish that I could get some tips for them when that's the case. Then moving on to the next one, a week today, we've got human factors in rail, which is now probably more pertinent than ever. And that's understanding how human factors can impact rail safety, performance in projects and so forth. So some great speakers for that as well. Further than that, all of our events are held on our new website. So if you've not been on a YRP event for some time, we've had a brand new website launched. Please make sure you register via the brand new website, as you won't be able to access events on the other one. It's the same, www.youngrailpro.com. Event section, registration's really easy, and you can still attend all events in the meantime. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening. We've had some camera issues, so we may not be able to get on webinar. But Andrew, are you with us?
Yeah, yes, yep, Jacob.
Hi, we can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Can you see me now as well?
I've sent you a webcam request, Andrew. There's a little picture of a camera next to your name. If you can click that.
Yeah. So I thought I'd done that earlier on. Yep. We've been to and froing. Can you see me now? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. I've got a life-size view of Jacob. That's all I'm looking at. So excuse. This is a new one on me. Anyway, thank you, Jacob, for your introduction, and thank you for everyone for listening in. It's obviously a real shame we can't be together, but it's brilliant actually to hear that YRP are using this capability and this functionality to keep people connected. I don't know about you, but I certainly get stir crazy sometimes being stuck at home. I'm now in a position where I'm working out in various Network Rail offices twice a week typically, and 3 days a week from home, and then lots of weekend work. And I know that sort of connection with the real world has been really important to me. At the same time, as seeing how adaptable people have been in these weird circumstances. I just want to start with a big thank you to everyone who's kept the railway going and developed in these crazy bonkers times. I mean, bonkers is the word I use more than any other about where we currently find ourselves. We have kept people moving. We've kept freight moving. In fact, freight is moving faster than it has done for several generations. We are running trains at a level of reliability that we've never previously known in this country. And in April and May, Network Rail construction activity was 25% of the total construction activity in the UK economy, because the rail sector was much more adaptable than many others in responding to the COVID crisis. So an enormous amount to be proud of and appreciative of for colleagues in the rail sector. And of course, almost inevitably, not a lot heard about it in the media because it's not a bad news story. But I'm conscious as well that this is a challenging time for many people. I'm conscious of my own children and my own daughter, who is dealing with working from home, working from her bedroom in a small flat in London, as somebody just starting out on a career, and the particular challenges that young people have in that regard. Very often, either having returned home to parents they thought they'd left behind a long time ago, or indeed finding themselves in difficult situations. So do hang on in there. Do make the use of networks like this, and do let your boss know how you're doing and how you're feeling. Very often they might not necessarily assume, or their assumptions might not be attuned with how you're actually feeling one way or the other at this moment in time. I was told you want to hear a little bit about my career. Well, it's an unusual one, I suppose, in many ways. I'm not an archetypal chief executive. My father was a factory worker making washing machines, and my mother worked on the till at W.H. Smith's in Merthyr Tydfil, and they had no academic qualifications between them. But I was lucky enough to go to university, and I had a hall residence near Victoria Station, so I decided to go for a holiday job at Victoria Station. This was in the mid-1980s, and I was fascinated by Victoria Station, not because I was an enthusiast about trains. I've got many friends who are enthusiasts. That's never been my particular interest, but because of the sense of the railway as a system, because of the complexity of human interactions, and because of the very, very tangible service-centric nature of what the railway does. And those were the things that really gave me the bug. And I joined what was then called the Operations Management Trainee System for British Rail back on Friday, the 13th of September, 1985. I'm not sure what comedian decided it was a good day to start people on Friday, the 13th of September. But that's been a bit of a lucky day for me. That was my first date with my wife was also on Friday, the 13th. So I'm not at all superstitious. I did the 50 months graduate training scheme, did 4 years in frontline jobs, and then decided to apply for something which was quite left field at the time. And I went to work in Parliament, working as a parliamentary liaison officer, working on bills, working on some low-key lobbying, but also then working as well on making the case for the Channel Tunnel rail link getting through Parliament. And that was a brilliant, brilliant job in giving me a real insight into how government worked, how politics worked, how the media worked. The downside was it made me into a bit of a workaholic, because as some of you will know, the railway day and diaries tends to be quite an early one, and the political one tends to be quite a late one. So I found myself burning the candle at both ends, but it was a job I delighted in doing. In fact, the hardest thing about that job was it was such a niche job that it was very easy to impress, and so I kept getting alternative job offers. And after just 18 months, I went to work on the Channel Tunnel project, which was the Britain's railways approach to being ready to link up with the Channel Tunnel. So the creation of what was then the Waterloo International Terminal, developing the plans for the Channel Tunnel, running the Eurostar stock, the establishment of Eurostar. I was the first company secretary of Eurostar, and gave me a brilliant example and a really good experience of project management and delivery, investment planning, and those sort of skill sets. And then John Major was elected in 1992, somewhat surprisingly, and decided that rail privatization was on his agenda, and I was asked to go and work as a relatively junior soul in the rail privatization unit, advising the government, or seeking to advise the government anyway, on options for rail privatization. And whilst I was there, I carried on doing my MBA, which was a very, very useful thing to do, because it gave me real affirmation that actually I could hold my own with people from blue chip businesses. And indeed, I did my sort of dissertation on incentivization models in privatized railways, which was a bit of a joke because there weren't any at the time, but at least it meant that nobody could disagree with me. So I found myself then in 1994 with a number of different options. That was when the railway was being broken up, and I went to work for Railtrack and got involved in the establishment of the track access agreements, negotiating them, negotiating the now infamous Schedule 8 and Schedule 4 regimes, and trying to be a focus for a customer-centric function in Railtrack. And I did that for 3 years, and I guess I must have been reasonably good at it because I was poached by one of my customers. A Stagecoach were running Southwest Trains, and they poached me to do a job. And the thing I really attracted me about that job was it was back doing a frontline job of leadership. It was a general management job. And the good thing about working for a company like Stagecoach is they were quite intuitive, and if you got on with them and if they liked what you were doing and you delivered for them, then you tended to move quite quickly. So within 18 months, I was the operations director. And then within another 18 months, due to a misfortunate event, which led to one of the Stagecoach main board directors having to resign, there was a promotion, and my then boss, the MD, went on to the main board of Stagecoach, and I became MD of Southwest Trains. I still remember the day now, the 1st of September 2000. No, yeah. It was just after my 36th birthday, and I was the MD of what was then the largest train operator in Britain. It was still the best job I've ever had, I have to say, because it was in a bit of a state, but we were able to do some brilliant things. And I was there when it was a good time to be part of the railway, I would contest. We saw a large-scale transformation of rolling stock with the replacement of Mark I trains with the now to zero fleet. We created the first truly integrated control centre following privatisation at Waterloo. We did a radical change to the timetable, which massively introduced train service performance. And a company that was known when I went there as the company that sacked too many drivers and was at the bottom of the league table. We won 2 national awards as Passenger Operator of the Year in the year that I left in 2005. But I left to have a portfolio job at First Group, where I became the MD for First Group's rail division. And the real attraction of that for me was several-fold. First of all, bluntly, I wanted to be part of a different culture to Stagecoach, not because I didn't like the Stagecoach culture. I really liked it, but I wanted to see if I could work in a tougher environment, and First Group had a reputation for being a tougher place to work. But more importantly, it was the portfolio that we had. So by the time at the end of my first year there, we were running 4 franchises, Great Western, ScotRail, Capital Connect, and TransPennine. But we also had Hull Trains, we had Croydon Tram, and we had GB Rail Freight. So I don't think there was anybody else. In fact, I still don't think there's been anybody else in Britain since British Rail days that had a portfolio that had freight, open access, tram, intercity, commuter, regional railway. So it was just a fascinating challenge, and not without its problems, but very rewarding. After doing that, though, for about 3.5 years, I was frankly just a bit fatigued with the railway. The franchising process, I think, was very predictable, and I decided to take a break. After 6 months of garden leave, I went to run the Civil Aviation Authority in London. So obviously a very, very different job, a job where we were principal the regulator, looking at economic regulation, safety regulation, the ATOL scheme, which if any of you booked summer holidays or booked with Thomas Cook or Monarch, you might know a little bit about ATOL, airspace modernisation, a big international dimension, brilliant job. The low point of which was probably having my picture on the front page of the Evening Standard on my birthday in 2010, with the headline, "The Man Who Shut Britain's Skies," where I was blamed for the closure of Britain's skies following the volcanic eruption Easter 2010 of AF Wheeler Yerkle. And I wouldn't say that again unless you're prepared to give some money to charity. But it's it was a really, that until the COVID crisis was the biggest crisis in many ways that I'd had to deal with, where actually it wasn't the CAA or myself who shut Britain's airspace. It was the air traffic controllers, but we had to find a way of opening it again. And it was a massive lesson to me in life that it's very easy to shut things down. How much harder is it to reopen them? So you should never, if at all possible, close things down unless you're clear on the criteria that will need to be true and present for you to reopen them. I did that job for 8.5 years. Got involved in lots of different things. The largest peacetime repatriation of British citizens, as was then with Monarch Airlines, since been overtaken by Thomas Cook failure. But that ability to turn a regulator, can you imagine just turning a regulator into an airline with all the activity that involved was an amazing achievement. And indeed, twice in my career, I found myself in tears at work. The first time was when I left South West Trains, because it had felt like my baby, and in my sort of leaving presentation, I started to blubber. I blame my sort of Welsh genes and heritage. And the second time actually was when I gathered our team together in the CAA after we'd completed the Monarch repatriation, when I just sort of was overflowing with pride for what that team had done. I say that because I don't think there's any shame in showing emotion as a leader. Indeed, I actually think that if we don't bring our humanity to the workplace, then we are bringing a diminished version of ourselves. Now, I've been talking so much, I've lost my notes, so you're gonna have to bear with me a second. My apologies for this. What I'm going to talk about now is just a little bit about my perception of where we are as an industry when it comes to COVID, and then latterly what I see as some of the big challenges for us as a sector as we go beyond this. Obviously, COVID has been a terrible, terrible tragedy for the country and for many of those people who have lost their lives or lost loved ones or have been struck down ill, and we've lost colleagues from the railway family. We've lost 3 colleagues in Network Rail alone, and I know if there's anybody on the call from TfL, then they've lost many, many more, and others from other parts of the rail network as well have suffered those losses. And every one of those people have left a legacy, and every one of those people will have left people who are grieving their loss. I've talked a little bit about our handling of this in the rather cliched use of the 4 Rs: respond, rebuild, revive, renew, or actually latterly revolutionise. respond being how we had to shut down and close down activities. Rebuild was how we started to restore. What I want to say a little bit about more today is the renew and then, the revive and revolutionize spaces, because that's largely where we are now. And that's where the opportunity is for you as young professionals in the industry. At the moment, as you probably know, we're only carrying about 11% of normal numbers of passengers every weekday. And I think truly we would be killing ourselves if we thought that, say, September, we would be back up to normal volumes. I think it will take years for the same level of capacity to be needed on the railway, simply because I think there'll be people who are reluctant to travel, but moreover, there'll be people who will permanently choose different lifestyles, different travel patterns, and of course there will be immense economic damage. And much of the railway actually is a bellwether for economic activity in this country. So having had for many years been the big challenge of managing overcrowding, we're now in a strange and pretty unprecedented position of not knowing how and when passengers will come back. And if, like me, you've had the opportunity to travel, there's something deeply disconcerting about traveling, as I've done some days, around 7 or 8 major stations in London, and you can, maybe haven't seen a couple of hundred passengers across all 7 or 8 in total. So we started a new phase of that journey on Monday, on July the 6th, when we have a further ramp up in train services, and broadly we'll be running around about 85–86% of peak capacity as of Monday. That is, it's important as we do that we sustain the very high level of reliability that we've been delivering currently. Not much point in having uber reliable trains if there are not many passengers to use them, or indeed if demand for freight is lower. We've absolutely got to be on top of our game in making sure that increase in service, our step change, delivers equivalent levels of reliability. We've been working pretty stably now at around about 96% ppm for each of the COVID periods. The last one finished just a whisk around 96% at last weekend. And what we must do is make sure that we don't fall back into old habits. I'll come back to what I mean by that maybe in a few minutes' time. COVID undoubtedly, despite all its horrors, does present an opportunity for us. And I'm very clear that it creates a platform for us to revolutionize much of our approach. Some of my colleagues in Network Rail said, will you please stop banging on about passengers? When are you going to talk about us? And I have a very blunt message for them, which is that an industry that talks about its colleagues and its staff and and each other more than it talks about the users of the railway is an industry that is doomed and destined to be in demise. So I make no apologies about being relentless and fixated with putting passengers first, because for me it is something that the industry has sometimes lost sight of, an overwhelming sense of why we're in business. And yes, when I say putting passengers first, I mean passengers and freight users. It's just that putting passengers first is a useful shorthand for that. And still too often delivering for passengers has meant colleagues having to go against or around Network Rail policy or industry policies or procedures. And what we've seen in this crisis, a level of creativity, a level of speed, a level of can-do that gives me absolute courage and conviction that we can be transformative as we come out of this. And let's be blunt, we need young rail professionals to be disruptors as part of that. Your energy, your ideas, your appetite to challenge, maybe your hunger, maybe your ambition can be one of the key catalysts for driving forward an industry which has a stronger future. Because I make no apologies for talking about being revolting. COVID has taught us that we can achieve much more when we respond dynamically and respond expansively. So I encourage you to be even more revolting than you think you are. Don't be put off by perfection. If you've worked in this industry for more than a year or so, you'll know how hard it can be to make change. But we don't have to change everything. But we do actually have to have the appetite to be part of that change ourselves. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that all of that is easy, or indeed diminish the scale of challenge the country and our industry will have, both in the immediate aftermath of this crisis and in the future. But we've got three big challenges that I want us to talk about a little bit today, and maybe can be the focus for some of the conversation. And there are three areas where I think we are desperately in need of innovation. The first is innovation in diversity. Obviously, in the aftermath of the George Floyd tragedy and the resurgence of Black Lives Matters, we are reminded again of just how much injustice there is in our society, and bluntly still in our railway. We know that BAME people are disproportionately affected by COVID, and in this very, very difficult time, people have had their eyes opened to the level of discrimination and brutality in the world at a time when people have wanted to be safe. We have targets, but do we take them seriously? Are they targets for target's sake, or because we have a burning passion to be an industry leaders, individuals, colleagues who care passionately about equality for all? Because, of course, that prejudice isn't just about diversity and lack of diversity for BAME communities. We know as well that we should be drawing on the talents of people from all genders, all ethnicities, and importantly to me, all social backgrounds. I spoke a little bit at the beginning how proud I am of the social diversity I can bring to my role. Would you believe that in a recent survey commissioned by Network Rail, just 26% of young women said that they intended to pursue a career in STEM-related areas? Actually, yes, I would believe it. But as a major employer, all of us in the industry have a responsibility, I believe, to tackle the issue of diversity head on and achieving a more balanced workforce, one that is more representative of the society within which we work. The society which gives us our license to operate is a critical part of my vision for Network Rail. When I eventually leave Network Rail, which I hope is not for some while yet, I want to be known as a chief executive of a company where every individual can contribute, succeed, and indeed to reach their full potential. And that will only happen if I lead and my colleagues lead with me. And let's be honest as well, we need to do more to prioritize mental health. This is an issue that's particularly important to me. I mentioned my daughter who's struggling, in a flat trying to work at the moment, and I know of many other colleagues as well whose mental health is suffering because of this tragedy and the imposition it has on our ways of working. 43% of people, according to research, are worried that coronavirus is having an impact on their mental health. And even more, 53% are worried about their loved ones. If you add that up, that's about 100,000 people in the rail industry who are either worried about their own mental health or are worried about that of their loved ones. So ensuring the health and well-being of colleagues is going to be critical to reviving and renewing. As I said before, people have lost friends and families, and we have a tremendous reputation in the industry for looking out for each other and looking after each other. It's something the railway family can do brilliantly, and it's something that I want to ensure that we all participate in, make it the norm. The second area where we need much more innovation is around technology. Why? Well, because a failure to embrace technology has made the industry less receptive to infrequent users. It alienates our customer base. It imports costs that we can ill afford. It has made us a less sustainable industry in terms of our carbon footprint and our biodiversity. It's made us a more congested industry because of the slow pace at which we've been able to embrace things like digital technology and the capacity that releases. Public finances are going to be very, very clearly challenged for many years on the back of COVID. It's going to be you and your children who will be paying for this long after the days when I have retired. We have no divine right to receive money from taxpayers to invest in the railway, and we will be competing with funding for roads and schools and hospitals. So I believe that if we're going to make the strong case for continued investments, like the investments the Prime Minister has announced this morning, we've got to demonstrate really spot on good value for money for every pound of taxpayer money we receive. That means we must be able to demonstrate how we can innovate to support government's other priorities, both including spreading prosperity around the country and decarbonising the UK economy. And in Network Rail, we will be signing off our big, ambitious 10-year sustainability strategy at next month's board meeting, and hoping then to launch that in August or September, as a key part of which is the UK National Rail Traction Decarbonisation Network Strategy. We know that the scale of decarbonisation is massive. If we are to support the government's legal obligation now to achieve net zero by 2050, and everything from the way we power trains to support passengers having green end-to-end journeys through electric charging points and bike access stations will be really, really important. There is a third area as well, though, where we need to innovate, and I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about that because it's a subject very close to my heart. Let me be honest, it's the reason I'm doing this job. We need to innovate in how we function and run the railway, because without this, I believe the other challenges will be very much harder to achieve. We simply will not achieve the pace of change in diversity or the pace of change of innovation in technology and cost if we go back to running the railway that we have done in the way we have done over the last 25 years. I think everyone across the industry knows we can't go on as we were before with the old franchising model. And getting the right industry structures in place, I think, is vitally important. And Sir Peter Hendy, our Network Rail chairman, and I are working closely with ministers to get this right. We've got to build a new system that works better for passengers, that includes fares, performance, and making those right investments. The case for change was there before COVID, and please don't think the case has gone away. And that's why Keith Williams, the ex-chief executive and chair of British Airways, deputy chair of John Lewis Partnership, currently chair of Royal Mail and of Halfords, was commissioned to look at the problems facing the industry. And I think it's worth us just touching for a little moment on that. What were the things that Keith mentioned? 8 things that he identified as needing resolving in future reform. First was insufficient consideration of trade-offs. We're in an era of tricky trade-offs, like the southern end of the East Coast Main Line, where there's difficult choice between long-distance intercity services and stop-in services on Thameslink. We've not had sufficient transparency or robust processes to make good, well-informed decisions. Secondly, a government that's too involved in day-to-day decision-making, and I think even ministers and officials would agree with this. I think Bernadette Kelly said last year, I believe that when Whitehall is so deeply immersed in the minutiae of delivery, it stifles the innovation we would normally expect the private sector to provide and disempowers the very people outside central government who are paid to do that same work, whilst also undermining the accountability of the industry to passengers. Powerful words and challenging stuff. It's not good that the government is so involved in detailed decision making. It delays things, it means decisions are compromised. Number 3, a hard one for us. Users do not trust the rail industry. Performance has been declining for the past 7 years, And every year we've put out a performance plan that says every year is going to get better. And every year, actually now for the last 9 years, we've failed to deliver that plan. Not 1 year in 9 has the rail industry delivered against its commitment to improve train service performance. Number 4, the industry is not working together as well as it could to deliver required outcomes. I'm sure you'll have seen some of that in your day jobs. Like the fact aside, excellent initiatives from organisations and bodies like YRP, you too, often through no fault of your own, sit in industry silos and aren't encouraged to get a wider understanding of how the network functions. We're not set up. I was appalled to see the state of the Network Rail graduate training scheme and how little visibility people got about how the system functioned, and that's something we've started to put right. Yes, the industry's collaborated well during this crisis, but it's despite the industry structures rather than because of them. Examples of where people have gone above and beyond is typically because they've circumvented industry processes to do the right thing. That shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't take a superhero to get things done across boundaries. Fifthly, incentive regimes can create conflict between industry parties. I mentioned right at the outset that I was involved in the setting up of Schedule 4 and Schedule 8, two big drivers of behaviours between operators and Network Rail. If you'd said to the people who were designing those in 1994 that they would be still in place 26 years on, essentially untouched, they would have laughed in your face. It is such a ludicrous proposition that we haven't changed those regimes, that they wouldn't have believed you. They were built together in a hurried fashion prior to privatization in a network that was carrying less than half the number of people we currently carry, in a very different financial environment, in a far less congested network, and without any experience of how they would have an impact on how people behave. It is madness that we still live with those regimes untouched, and a real indictment of our inability to self-regenerate. Number 6, there's a poor understanding of whole industry profit and loss account and affordability constraints. All too often I see Network Rail schemes which are developed, which actually are priced out because they bear no relation to the revenue that they can generate. And I see people looking for big infrastructure schemes, and rolling stock solutions would be a better solution. I see people building infrastructure or building timetables which simply don't work. Do you know, there is no industry profit and loss account other than with the permanent secretary at the Department for Transport. No wonder we don't always make the right choices. 7th, industry risk is not well managed or understood, and we saw that with the catastrophe, which was the May 18 timetable. And lastly, lack of industry leadership and accountability. While we have some great, fabulous leaders across the sector, some of whom I've been privileged to call friends for 30 years or more now, there isn't enough clear accountability and leadership for the network. And that again is what in part leads to some of the issues we saw in May 18 with the timetable change, where no single person or body was properly responsible and accountable for bringing it all together. In this crisis, we've seen great work to make agile timetable changes, partly because of the capability and processes put in since then. But these are cross-industry processes which require everyone working together and pulling in the right direction, and long-term structural change is needed. Now, all of those things which are eminently fixable. I've had the opportunity to read the white paper drafted by Keith Williams, and he comes up with radical but exciting deliverable proposals. Who knows what will happen to that, because of course COVID has changed so much. It will have changed government bandwidth, it will have changed the priorities of Parliament. The challenge for us as a sector will be our ability, our willingness, our appetite to self-regenerate, or are we content to sit and wait for politicians to do the tough stuff for us? That's a big ask. It's a big ask when you've got separate shareholders and stakeholders, when you've got vested interests, when you're sometimes heavily invested in today's model. But it is the choice we face, to wait and become victims of the next political decision, or to demonstrate that we can generate and regenerate for ourselves. I'm a passionate believer that the 200,000 people who work in the rail industry deserve better than we currently provide, and that the 5 million passengers and thousands of freight forwarders deserve better than we can currently provide. So it's some big challenges ahead, but actually I genuinely believe that there's a clear prize to be won. And indeed one that you, the participants in this webinar, can be the main beneficiaries of. If we meet these challenges, those of you working in the rail industry, which I hope will still be, most of you will be working in an industry which achieves great things for our country and is more diverse with more opportunities for great careers. And ultimately, we'll be delivering on our fundamental purpose of getting people and goods where they need to be, supporting our country's economic prosperity. So, thank you for listening. I hope that's given you some food for thought. I hope it's sufficiently challenging, but I'm really, really now looking forward to hearing from you. Do let me know your thoughts and any questions you might have. You know, I'm a great believer that these are wasted opportunities if we don't ask the tricky questions. So by all means, feel free, either under the cloak of anonymity, or if you're feeling particularly courageous, then give us your name, and let's hope that we can do this in a way which allows us to have a conversation. Thank you, and back to you, Jacob.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Andrew. I'm sure our members will agree. Really good talk and some really good points. We've had quite a few good, well, we've had a lot of good questions sent in. So are you okay if I just run through a few of them one by one?
I'll try to answer them quickly, shall I?
Yeah. So we've got around about 20 minutes, so there might be a few trickier ones. So the first question, so obviously being, there's quite a lot of aspirational leaders within the young rail professionals. So somebody has asked, Zahid has asked, what skills and experience are sought after in the rail industry to progress to exec level, in your opinion? Can't hear you, Andrew. Somebody turned his audio off. 1 minute.
I can hear nothing at all.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Right, so I didn't hear any of the question. I couldn't, whatever happened.
No problem. I'll repeat the question then. So in your opinion, what skills and experience are sought after in the rail industry to progress to executive level?
Well, I think, look, the brilliant thing is that we're such a diverse organisation that you can bring a phenomenal range of skills. My particular passion is that for the last generation, we've understated the operational expertise. So I'm particularly interested in that because it's an area that I think we've had a gap, and I think we need to rebuild that capability. But as I said, you know, we were 25% of the UK construction activity in April and May. So people with brilliant project skills. We've got some world-leading asset management capability. We've had, I think in the last 10 years, we've had about half a dozen of the top 10 finance graduates in the world, in people who've scored in the very, very top of the CIMA or Institute of Chartered Accountants examinations. So, and the other thing I think there is really, really important now, that is brilliant people skills. We are a people organisation. We're a people sector, and technology will not replace those people for several generations, if at all. So valuing those people skills and agility and adaptability alongside those technical skills, for me, is critical.
Brilliant. So moving on to the next question. I really like this question, actually. So Michael asked,
Did you write it yourself, Jacob?
I didn't. No. I will. The question I'm going to ask, though, I will say it's someone else, just so it doesn't, prevent my career progression.
Oh, okay.
No. So, what are the biggest new lessons from COVID the industry which the industry would not have experienced before, and how can they be used for the benefit of the industry?
For me, I think two things. First of all, the pace at which you can introduce change. We did timetable changes at a fraction of the normal pace, and we did them well. Secondly, much more agile working. So we don't need to have all those endless boring meetings, and we don't travel up and down the country to sit in a meeting where we feel disengaged. And that has meant that we can do a lot of work more quickly. Just for an example, my executive leadership team, we used to get together once a quarter to deal with, once a month to deal with strategy. But it used to be once a quarter for 2 days to do strategy days. And then about 6 months ago, we just did them once. We did them once a month for a day and spread them out. What we do now is we do them once a week instead for an hour, so that we are driving the strategic agenda of Network Rail at a much faster pace. We don't wait for a quarterly slot. We've got an hour slot every week where we can drive that through. So that sense of agility, I think, and responsiveness for me is the biggest learning.
Brilliant, thank you. So this is picking up on one of the kind of 3 key points that you made, and one being diversity. So do you think Network Rail could do more to influence external stakeholders such as TOCs and the supply chain, and embracing diversity change? And I guess that's beyond Network Rail as well, so the Department of Transport as well.
Well, yes. Well, first of all, is we shouldn't pretend we've got our own house sorted. We've still got big challenges internally, but we do have critical mass, so we can do that. And in fact, a number of our regions now have cross-industry diversity networks, and the LGBTQ plus network in particular has been very good at reaching out there in building that sort of connection across industry. But we have critical mass, and we can certainly do more to support others in that journey. And I think that for me, the key there is to be very, very conscious about what other people are trying to say to you.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So got a question here from Caitlin. So as a chief executive, what are your day-to-day tasks? Would you say that your previous experiences have assisted you in performing the well role and allowed you to be confident in taking a role at that level?
So this is my 20th year as a chief executive or MD. So it's hard to think about what life was like before, to be honest, when I had a proper job. Look, the key things for me are about, as a chief executive, about caring about the business, both today and for the long term. So that is my challenge in my job is to balance those two things the whole time. Is to not to be so focused on the long term that you discount what happens today, and equally not to be so caught in today that you discount what happens to the future. So having long-term strategies, building people, developing talent, nurturing, but also holding people to account for delivery today. What was this morning's peak like? Why did that fatality at Earlswood this morning take so long to clear up, industry? Literal example this morning, it's that combination of people knowing that you care about the minute by minute, but also that you have a vision for the future. And I think as it helped, I think, look, I was helped because I was chucked in it at a really young age. Well, at 36 felt to me like a young age to be doing that sort of job. But I've also had some brilliant mentors in chairs. I work now with Sir Peter Hendy, who is an outstanding individual, and in my last job, I worked with a lady called Dame Deirdre Hatton, both of whom will be lifelong friends to me, both of whom I didn't know till I took the jobs. So it's not, but actually who have been brilliant allies and really, and that, as a chief executive, you need that because it can be a bit lonely. You can't be the best mate of all your colleagues in work. You're compromised if you are. You might be friendly with them, you might respect them, but ultimately, you know, you've got to be slightly remote, and in that context, having your own support networks are really important.
Thanks. I think that's a great insight. The next question we've been asked is, and this is by Alex, what technologies and innovation are you most excited about in years to come?
Well, I'm really excited by digital signaling, basically because we've been talking about it for such a long time and haven't done it. But within 2 years from now, we should have the first signals away line operating in Britain's mainline railway. And that, why am I excited about it? Well, because it produces additional capacity. It keeps people safer because it gives a level of protection which isn't in TPWS, and it requires it requires lower cost, and it keeps track workers safer as well because of the reduced level of attention they need on a line side. If we can deliver that, then we will be able to, you know, to tick a lot of boxes in a way that we don't have another technology currently. I could talk for lots of others, but that would be the other one. Obviously, the other big thing then is about understanding the pace at which we can roll out alternatives to electrification, which are carbon-free.
Thank you. So this question's from Daniel, and it's building on the fact that you said that the railway does have quite a bad reputation. And what do you think the industry can do to integrate itself in the heart of the public and change that reputation?
It's very easy. Run a good service. You know, if you look at the railways, which now have a good reputation, they're the people who run a decent service. Bluntly, you don't hear many people who have a bad word about Chiltern Railways. Very few of its customers. Why? Because it has consistently run reliable train service. If you look at Scotland, and track, you know, when I in my first presentation as chief executive of Network Rail internally, I showed people a 20-year mapping of the National Rail passenger satisfaction scores and PPM. The correlation between the two is staggering. And frankly, if we run a good, reliable service, then actually we can transform that. We kid ourselves if we think that actually we can manage our reputation whilst our service quality is poor. People are rational, intelligent beings in the large part.
Excellent. So the next question, do you feel the current industry safety culture is proportionate and flexible enough to ensure that the railway can adapt to the future?
I think we've got a bad safety culture. And I think it is certainly true that what we have seen in many cases is we have tried to use restrictive rules and regulations because we've not tackled the cultural issues underlying poor safety performance. It was a real, it's an absolute tragedy for me that in my first year as chief executive of Network Rail, we lost 2 colleagues at Margam a year ago next week. And it was a double tragedy because we could sort of see it coming, but it wasn't, not necessarily at Margam, but the indicators were there, and we'd just set up a major task force to try to deal with it. But it's been a real eye-opener to me that within days of Margam, we saw shocking line-side behaviour. And I don't just blame the individuals for that. I blame a system that has condoned that culture. I blame the managers who support it. I believe the colleagues who condone it as well. Actually, our safety culture is nothing like as good as it ought to be. And we've relied on very expensive investment and very cumbersome procedures and processes to mitigate our very poor safety culture. And that is one of my big passions about tackling that safety culture, and it's going to be tough. It's going to mean tackling long-standing practices. It's going to be requiring skilling people up to do things differently, changes to terms and conditions, changes to leaders, changes to levels of commitment, financial commitment. But I think whoever asked the question, I think there's a real germ there that you cannot compensate for poor safety culture by endless process and investment.
Brilliant. So moving on to the next one, which is in relation to putting passengers first.
Yep.
So how do we resolve conflict between projects which are attempting to implement change to put passengers first and other colleagues, whether it be operations colleagues or others who are happy with the status quo and resistant to change?
Well, look, we've got to be better at, as I said, selling, not telling. Maybe I didn't say that. I was doing another conversation earlier on today, so I probably misremember. It is all we kid ourselves. How many times do we change our thoughts and our perceptions just because somebody told us something? We've got to get better at selling that. And for me, COVID, in that sense, does create a platform. When we get to September and we are, 70% of normal traffic volumes, it will be an enormous wake-up call to the industry that says our futures, our own personal careers and prosperities depend upon being a business, a sector that people want to use. And I think we've had it, in some ways, we've had it too easy. We haven't had a burning platform. Businesses come flocking to the railway historically because of the economic shift of activity into city centres. It's not because we've been doing an outstanding job of attracting them. And so I think, frankly, that we mustn't waste this awful crisis to make the point that we need to be attractive to people as opposed to being the least worst way of going somewhere they don't want to go in the first place.
Thank you. So I think we've probably got time for maybe 2 more questions. So I'll read this one. This is from Karunya. And this is for aspiring leaders. Would you recommend varied experience within different industries or organisations, or to work up the career ladder within one organisation?
I would definitely recommend some variety. I think it's very hard, even if you just do it through secondments. I think getting different cultures, experience different leadership styles, seeing things from a different perspective or a different end of the lens is really, really important. I was dead lucky that I joined the rail industry when I could do a range of different things. Then I worked for Railtrack. Then I went to work for train operators. Then I went outside of the industry. Then I was a non-executive in a Roscoe, and now I've come back to Network Rail. I couldn't have done my job if I'd stayed in Railtrack in 1997 and done those other things. Apart from that, I think I would have gone stir crazy, So I would encourage people to be diverse, but to make sure make sure you're doing it for genuine diverse experience. If all you do is do the same job with a different label, then that's not really diversity, is it?
No, that's really good insight. So thank you for that. I think we've got time for one more question, and largely it's because it's the question that I wanted to ask.
Okay.
So just, you mentioned that there's likely, because of COVID, there's going to be a reduction in the number of passengers using the service, and therefore the capacity is going to be less. Like, in my opinion, as a network, we've always kind of lagged behind having the correct levels of capacity, which is why we've impacted performance. So in the kind of short to medium term, now might be a better opportunity than ever to make sure we build for the long term and actually meet the capacity, rather than chasing it. But how do you see us convincing the Treasury and others that that's the right thing to do when the value that they get from investing in these schemes might not be seen for a long time?
Look, it's a very pertinent question, Jacob. We can't, first of all, as I said before, we've got no inalienable right to investment. When I started off my career as a young rail professional, investment was almost non-existent because the railways were in decline. So the first thing we can do is actually to encourage people back to demonstrate that the drop-off is transient. We will not persuade the Treasury to invest unless they see people returning, even if. So we need to be able to model that return trajectory. Secondly, we've got to demonstrate that we can deliver reliably and value for money. So I just kicked off a project called Project Speed 2 weeks ago, and the Prime Minister, the blighter, has today announced a project called Project Speed, doing exactly the same thing. I'm sure he hasn't crippled mine, it's just a coincidence, but that's about how do we radically reduce the timescales and the costs of introducing new investment into the railway. We're just too slow at doing it, and our cost base has been too unreliable. So if we can demonstrate there is going to be a need, if we can demonstrate that there's political capital and that we can deliver it cost efficiently, then I think we'll be able to put a credible case forward. But it will not come because because we feel sorry for ourselves or we have a sense of entitlement. We've really got to make that case.
No, brilliant. And yeah, so I think we've ended almost bang on 6 o'clock, so it's good punctuality. And thank you very much for all of your input and answering all of them questions. I got through a lot of questions there.
Not at all.
Yeah, really appreciate your time. I think before I just sign off, just ask our audience to make sure they check out our other upcoming webinars, especially the one that's tomorrow with some really good speakers on career development again. And other than that, yeah, that's everything. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everyone. All the very, very best. Stay safe.
Thank you.